Hello everyone. Today on the Deep Dive I will be ranking the films of Christopher Edward Nolan. Christopher Nolan began his career in 1998 with a low-budget film called Following that was filmed, written, and edited by Nolan himself. The attention that Following received led Nolan to develop a short story of his own called Memento Mori, which then developed into his breakout feature Memento, which drew critical acclaim and was the beginning of Nolan's skyrocketing career. He's one of the most respected and most well-known filmmakers today, and his films have grossed billions of dollars. As the budget for Nolan's visions got bigger with each film, it's clear to see his influence from filmmakers like Stanley Kubrick and Steven Spielberg specifically when it comes to the technical aspects of his features. So without further ado, let's rank Nolan's work from 1998 to 2020. Tenet. If you haven't seen my Tenet review already, go ahead and check that one out, but if you have seen it, then you know that I'm not the biggest fan of this movie. It's definitely Nolan's most ambitious film, but ambition doesn't always necessarily equate to success. I'm sure there are a few out there who honestly believe that this is his best work, but I just don't see it. For such a grand production and obscure concept, the film somehow felt underwhelming and less epic in scope and scale. Nevertheless, the visuals are impressive and the score is good, given that it's not done by Hans Zimmer, who's usually Nolan's go-to composer. The biggest problem with Tenet is that it has this belief that just because it becomes more complex as the story goes on, because it wants you to revisit and pick up on details you may have missed, that it thinks it automatically makes that a good movie. But when the story and the concept of this universe isn't itself appealing or interesting, there's really no point to revisit it and invest your time into it. Following was Nolan's feature film debut and only really ranks this low because it was essentially a low-budget student film, especially compared to his later work. It's an interesting story about a drifter obsessed with following strangers until he runs into the wrong one, leading to a life in an underworld of crime and deception. You can definitely tell that Nolan would implement this neo-noir feel to nearly all of his films afterwards, and there are moments and glimpses of what would make Nolan so successful later on. For a semi-professional debut, the use of black and white fits the noir theme, and the performances from Jeremy Theobald and Alexander Haw are memorable. You can check this one out on Amazon Prime with a premium subscription, or get the Criterion release on DVD. Interstellar was really just a mess. It's a film that I like, don't get me wrong, but like Tenet, it seems to be reaching for something, trying to be deep in its own exploration of space and time, and ultimately in the themes of love. Yes, love is the key to everything in the face of mankind's possible extinction. And the problem with that is it can ultimately get lost in its own story for its 2-hour and 50-minute runtime. While I do think that the cinematography by Hoyt van Hoytema is beautiful and the score by Hans Zimmer fits the film seamlessly, it runs into an issue of trying to balance the storyline from the characters in space to the events taking place back on Earth. It's a film that has great moments, but ultimately as a whole, it drags, especially in the second act, where Nolan just has to feel the need to add villains when he didn't need to. You know what? Yes, Matt Damon. Matt Damon is totally the right fit for a villain in this movie. Okay, so I was originally going to rank the Dark Knight trilogy as one movie, but the more I think about it, and the more I think about the Dark Knight Rises specifically, and going back and revisiting it and rewatching it, the less I feel like I actually like this movie. This was the beginning of Nolan's descent into the mindset that more is better. The bigger the set piece, the better the movie, right? But that's not what made the first two Batman films great. It was the character development and the world building that was created to make it seem like this universe could actually exist. It's hard to follow up The Dark Knight, and I know this film had a hard task of doing that, especially when The Dark Knight is considered by many to not only be the greatest superhero film of all time, but one of the best movies ever made, period. So it was a given that this film would not be near the level that The Dark Knight reached and essentially set the bar for, but this was just the least satisfying and least interesting Dark Knight film. I can go on and on about just how weak the supporting cast of this movie is compared to the supporting cast we got in The Dark Knight. Anne Hathaway as Catwoman isn't compelling nor interesting. I feel like there was a weird imbalance with her character. At one point, she's just like a sly type of spy type character who has an on and off romance with Bruce Wayne. There's like sexual tension there that never really gets explored. And the writing for that character just seems all over the place. And then Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character as John Blake was a shoo-in throwaway character that was basically there to just set up having an unearned hero's intro to be the next Batman, which we'll never see, so I don't really get the point of why that had to be his ending. It just felt completely unearned. And there's a whole story arc about how John Blake knows that Bruce Wayne is Batman. Spoiler alert, I mean, who hasn't seen this movie already? So yeah, spoiler alert, John Blake knows that Bruce Wayne is Batman. And he reveals that he knows this by recounting a story of when Bruce Wayne visited orphans, and John Blake happened to be one of those orphans, and he could just tell by a look on Bruce Wayne's face that he was Batman. Like, what? That's stupid. Bane essentially becomes a throwaway villain in the final act of the film, despite a great introduction and a solid performance by Tom Hardy, despite the fact that his face is covered for the whole movie. But his character doesn't get any development or backstory that's compelling until his final scene, which, one of the stupidest ends to a villain in this entire trilogy. And the ending just feels like a cop-out that defies logic, even for a superhero movie. The ending of this trilogy doesn't sum up or even remotely connects to the themes of The Dark Knight that made Batman such a compelling character in the first place. It just felt like Nolan always wanted a happy ending for Bruce Wayne no matter what, but it honestly would have been more daring and more realistic if he gave us more of a grim but still hopeful ending. It's an unsatisfying end to an otherwise almost great trilogy. Dunkirk is surprisingly one of Nolan's most critically acclaimed films, and given the context and meaning of the film he was striving towards, he almost reached his goal, at least in my opinion. The dogfight sequences, the score, and the performances from this large cast are the strength of this film. Its biggest weakness, however, was that it felt like there could have been so much more. I get that there was this sense of urgency Nolan wanted to implement, hence the 107-minute runtime, but there could have been so much more he could have explored given the historical context of the events being depicted. We are basically stuck with the same characters with 3 separate storylines taking place within different time periods of the same event, and towards the end of the film, the editing can just get a bit jumbled and convoluted. Other than that, Dunkirk is a good technical achievement with a lasting message on the endurance of humanity even through defeat, as defeat and survival can lead to newfound strength and hope for another day to fight. The Prestige is a sleeper hit among Nolan fanboys and is even considered his most underrated film, and some even consider it his best. The story, revolving around magic, attention to detail, and betrayal, are unlike anything Nolan has done in this fashion at this point of his career in 2006. Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale are fantastic as magician rivals, with showmanship and practicality coming face to face as they battle it out to see which form of magic ultimately succeeds. The revelation towards the end of the film is the cause of divide among moviegoers, and you can either accept it or find it complete bullshit, and that's what Nolan most likely intended, but for me, I liked it, and I thought it was a good movie. Certainly not his best, but I don't know, I enjoyed it. Check it out. Insomnia, to me, is Nolan's most underrated film. Al Pacino stars in the film as Detective Will Dormer, who was haunted by an incident in his past where he accidentally shot his own partner in pursuit of a serial killer, played brilliantly by Robin Williams. Comedians always play the best psychopaths, don't they? Why is that? This incident causes Dormer, or Al Pacino's character, to have insomnia, and he is haunted by the same serial killer that he's been chasing. It's a solid drama mixed with mystery and a psychological battle between Williams and Pacino. And the best moments of this film comes from the dialogue exchange between them about morality, accountability, and guilt. It's the most un-Nolan-like film, and sometimes that can be a good thing. Memento is a mystery drama starring Guy Pearce as a man trying to retrace his steps following a murder. His frequent blocks of amnesia causes him to lose track of events as the course of the film continues, and he has to rely on different sources, including his own tattoos, to solve his mystery. Memento is smartly crafted, with a crisp, cohesive narrative that comes together better than most of Nolan's future efforts. We are heavily invested in the protagonist Leonard Shelby's story, and are in for a unique and entertaining ride that's full of tense sequences after another in a grand atmosphere. Even though it's one of Nolan's most critically acclaimed works, it's not a film that's really talked about amongst his fans. But it definitely should be checked out because it's gonna be one of the few Nolan films that doesn't have anything to do with the concept, really. Batman Begins. Well, Roger Ebert said it best.
Batman Begins is the 5th Batman movie, but the first one to get it right, to get it absolutely right.
And he is 100% correct. This was the first Batman film to give not only Batman, but Bruce Wayne a soul and a purpose. Don't get me wrong, I love Michael Keaton Batman. Val Kilmer and George Clooney, not so much. But Christian Bale owns it as Bruce Wayne. We are given a full origin story that creates and also redefines the character of Batman and Bruce Wayne. But it never strays away from what made Batman so popular in the first place. He's a perfect combination of justice seeking and fear inducing for the sake of protecting his city, and finding retribution for the parents he felt he could never make up their loss for. Liam Neeson is also a badass in this movie, and Cillian Murphy is a perfect scarecrow slash Jonathan Crane. Now, personally, my favorite iteration of the Batman character is from the Batman animated series, and I feel like of all the films that we've gotten of The Dark Knight, this is probably the closest thing to it, so it holds a special place in my heart. Inception seems to have suffered a backlash in the past decade, and maybe that's because the subpar critical response of Interstellar and Tenet made people revisit this film and try to find flaws that they didn't see before. I mean, there are those annoying people who swear that just because this movie made them think that it automatically makes it a masterpiece. I get that, that can be pretty annoying, but that's not what makes this movie great to me. It's an interesting storyline that is further improved by Nolan's direction, Wally Pfister's amazing cinematography, and Hans Zimmer's Oscar-worthy score, and an ensemble cast led by a strong lead performance from Leonardo DiCaprio. It's both an emotionally investing and interesting piece of work with one of the most satisfying conclusions in a Nolan film yet. What separates this from Nolan's later work afterwards is that Nolan still understood that his characters were just as important as his story, whereas today it seems like the story is more important than the characters. And it's unfortunate given that his screenplays, at least before 2014, had a strong emphasis on both character and storyline. And if he continues to make movies based on concepts like Inception, I hope it can be at least on this type of level where he's able to balance everything out. The Dark Knight is easily the best film in Nolan's entry. It's a perfect combination of world building, atmosphere, character development, and a fluctuating narrative culminating into an unforgettable ending. Without The Dark Knight, I doubt the superhero film fandom today would be as popular or huge in our culture. Heath Ledger's portrayal as the Joker is bar none one of the best villain portrayals of all time. It has inspired a framework of comic book villain portrayal and created a revival of the Joker character in the anarchist villain archetype. I'm not going to be one of those people that try to make this film something deeper than it actually is by trying to make the philosophies of good and evil explored throughout the film sound like it's a goddamn Terrence Malick or Tarkovsky film, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of things that are spelled out for you, and that can be a dangerous sin when movie characters have to be used as exposition points for the audience. But The Dark Knight manages to tell a compelling enough story and have enough compelling performances to be quite possibly the greatest comic book film ever made. It's a great continuation of the Dark Knight universe, and it's one that any audience can easily buy into. It's the most engaging film Nolan has ever done, and it might be the best film he'll ever make. It's entertaining, grand, dark, and unforgettable. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Rank 'Em All, with this week's guest being Christopher Nolan. If you like this video, and if you like my other videos, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support means everything. You guys and you girls are awesome, and I'll see you next time.